Of course, the best way to improve your photography is by going out with your camera, chasing the light and coming home with great images. But even as a full-time photographer, I struggle with the same problem as you do. Life gets in the way. Work, responsibilities, bad weather. Sometimes we simply don't have as much time for photography as we'd like to. So today, let's improve our visual skill set in a different way. We'll take a close look at the Hasselblad Masters 2026 shortlist in the architecture category and analyze what actually makes these images work or not. So grab your favorite drink and let's dive into this analysis together. This video is kindly sponsored by Hasselblad. I personally love analyzing award-winning images because it helps me understand what makes a photograph stronger and how I can improve my own work. In one of my recent videos, I talked about what I believe it takes to win the Hasselblad Masters. So today, let's see if those ideas actually show up in the 2026 shortlist. If you want to follow along and vote for your own favorite series, go to hasselblad.com and log in to view the shortlisted work from all 7 categories. For this video, I screenshotted all the images from the architecture category and uploaded them to Milanote, so we can look at them more intentionally. Instead of scrolling past an image in 2.7 seconds, like we do on Instagram, we'll slow down a bit and let each series sit for a moment. And remember, this is not about tearing anyone down. It's about training our eye. So let's start with the first series. I immediately recognized this very famous building in Los Angeles. It's part of the old airport and got transformed to a hotel now. What immediately sticks out to me is the color grading in this image. I really like the warm tones and the pastelic look of the image. And looking through all 3 images, the photographer really understood how to use this look on the whole series. I like that he integrated people for scale in the image, but looking at the people, they look a little bit disconnected to the scene. When you add people to the photo, it should really elevate it and tell a deeper story. Also looking at the details, we have a little light cut off here at the edge, and also the frame of the window here is slightly cut off, which puts me off just a little bit. I also don't really like that he cut off this part of the image. I don't really know what it is, and it's just a little bit disturbing. And we can see these little details in all of his images. For example, here he cut off the TWA just at the corner of the image. A little bit more breathing room would have improved that frame. I would also have removed the tower over here and maybe even this one, just to make the scene a lot cleaner. Okay, let's go to the next series. Whew. So these images are different. The blue in the background is really grabbing my attention, and we have the mountains, the bridge and this old house, which is a very interesting combination of strong structures by themselves, but the combination of all 3 of them really makes this image dynamic. I would say the house down here is the main subject of the frame, but it's also very dark and muddy in its colors, a little greenish yellow tint, and I would really like to see this more prominent. You can either do this in post-production or use a flashlight or something on location to elevate this part of the image a bit more. Wow, that's a completely different scene. So we are jumping from somewhere in the countryside in a mountainous area to an industrial site in the city, and then even more contrast, a concrete building in the middle of the mountains in a foggy environment. How can we bring these 3 images together? I mean, their color grading by themselves is very good, but also different from image to image. The scene changes, the building changes, so there's really the question, why did the photographer choose these 3 images and how did he connect them with each other? What I'm missing here in the Hasselblad Masters is a little description of the image series. But looking at them a little bit longer, I think what combines these images very well is the central perspective. All the main subjects are in the center of the frame, and the composition really draws the eye towards the building. So that works pretty good. And thinking a little bit longer about the images, there's also a feeling of threat. We have these runnable structures that are getting overwhelmed by their surrounding. And I feel in every image that the building might be disappearing sooner than later. And looking at the series from this perspective, I really quite like how the photographer pulls that off. Okay, third series. I can't say anything bad about this. It's a very classic one-point perspective. We have a clean backdrop through the night sky, a clean street, and you can really focus on just 3 elements. There's the building, front and center, very symmetric and bright. Then my eye goes towards this little structure down here, which I like that he included it. It looks more realistic if you have these torn down structures in the frame, and it just gives a little bit more context to the scene. And then my eye jumps to the brightest point of the street lamp, gets drawn down again to the house, and I think this movement here works very well. This image is even more simplistic, and I really like it as well. It really tells a story. It's an old theater, and you see just the silhouette of some trees in the night in the background. What I really love here are the layers. It feels split in different levels and then cut in the center through this line. And you even have this little leading line here in the street that leads towards the entrance of the building. Great shot. So this one is a little bit different. If you compare the third image to the first two, you can really see a change in the composition. For the first 2 images, we had straight street lines, straight buildings, and here the third theater is on a hillside. The building itself is captured much bigger. I would have preferred if the size of the building stayed the same as the first 2 compositions. As much as I like the first 2 images, I think the third image, although it's strong by itself, is deteriorating the series a little bit in its whole. So this is amazing. I mean, have you seen architecture captured like that? I think it's infrared photography. I've just been researching this topic a little bit and find it very enticing to show the world in a completely different look, in a completely different light that we aren't even able to see ourselves. Also, the photographer clearly knows what he does. He captured a perfect central perspective. If you look at the shadow line, it's just ending with this part of the grass and gives even more symmetry to the scene. Of course, the central perspective helps a lot here as well to really focus the eye on the center and then moves it up to the tower. We have some negative space, a little cloud to break up the centrality of the image. The only thing that's putting me off a little bit is this window here. I think it would have been easy to clean that up in Photoshop, but that's just my perfectionism. That's a good continuation. So I think we are staying in the same area. The photographer just documented these buildings from different viewpoints. Also very clean perspective with nice composition. We have a strong leading line towards the chimney here. This is the central point, the chimney and the 2 street lamps. This building really helps to stop the view so we don't get drawn out on the left side of the image. And it just has a very nice flow where we circle around the image to experience it. I think I know this building. It's in the western part of Germany. It's an old coal mine called Neue Zeche, and it's UNESCO World Heritage Site that is protected and a big museum. So the site itself is captured a million times, but it's the first time I've seen it like this. And this is a strong accomplishment. When you choose a site that many people know, giving it your own spin and creating something special out of it is even harder than with unknown sites. So kudos to this photographer for pulling this off. Also, the composition here again is amazing. We have this old big crane structure, which is definitely one of the main attractions of the building. A very big, strong leading line coming from the left to the right. And looking a little bit closer, we have these 3 little houses here on the roof of the building, and their shadow is just perfectly on this side of the building. Probably a coincidence, but nonetheless a great accomplishment to have this timing to really pull off the shot with the shadows exactly in the right position. I think that's my favorite series so far. So then let's move on to series number 5, grain elevators. So the topic itself of grain elevators is nothing new to write home about. So we have a jump in the orientation of the image from landscape to portrait. And then the third one is also a portrait. I really like this image. It works very well. I like the gray color of the grain elevator against the similar colored clouds. The foreground looks almost like a little long exposure, or we have some out of focus areas going on, but it really feels like the foreground is moving towards this direction, and it looks more like ocean waves than a static scene, which is contradicted by the very stoic sculptural feeling of the house itself. What do you think? Is this the same building just from the other side? So I mean, of course you can make a photo series about just one building, but it feels to me that the photographer had the same vantage point and just moved on the other side of the building and took the same shot again. That feels a little bit repetitive. Looking at these two images, they just feel too similar to be in a Hasselblad Masters series next to each other. And then we have a third image that has another orientation, but really doesn't tell me much more of the story. It's just another grain elevator. I see why the photographer didn't choose a complete central perspective, because we have more weight on the right side. So he had to put this building a little bit towards the left just to give the right amount of balance. That was well accomplished, but I really don't like that he included a car here. And the rest of the image is just not very interesting to me. When I look at these shots, I get immediately reminded by a series by Alex Berg. I really like how he captured the grain elevators in different times of day. He really chose different types of grain elevators. He had different weather conditions. And I think these images tell a much deeper story about this subject matter. You can check out his series and how he shot it in the March 2020 issue of Medium Format magazine. The link is in the description below. A quick observation before we continue. In 2026, there are no black and white series in the architecture shortlist. What really stands out instead is the consistency in post-production. Every series has a clear visual style and a carefully controlled look. But consistency in image format is not equally strong across all submissions. In my opinion, a more consistent format would have improved both the TWA series and the grain elevator series. Another thing that becomes clear again: simple compositions with one strong visual focus are still incredibly important. And what I find interesting is that both approaches can work. Typologies, where you compare similar structures across different places, and deeper studies of one specific building. Okay, let's continue with number 6. Now I think we're getting a little bit more abstract and artsy. And let's see how the photographer pulls this off. So we have a strong leading line from the lower right corner leading into the image, and the building continues this line up to the left corner. Also this line leads up to the left corner, and we have a little horizontal line, but which also gets drawn towards this side. And then there's this little person down here. And when you look at the arrows that I just drew into the image, you can really see why there's a problem in this photo. Because although we enter with a strong diagonal line, all the image lines pull us out of the image to the upper left corner. And then we get drawn a little bit towards the person, but immediately we are getting drawn again to the upper left corner and leave the frame without creating a circle inside the image to keep us there. I really like this image. It's quite the opposite in its composition compared to the first one, because here we have a very big incentive to stay in the center of the image. There's again a leading line from the lower right corner, similar to the first shot, and we get immediately drawn to this person here. And the composition just gets stronger from all sides. We have a leading line towards the person from here. So all these shapes really center the image where the person stands. And although you see a big concentration of lines in the lower part of the image, we have some breathing room, some empty space in the upper part, which is important to give this image a little bit depth and calmness. So really great shot. It reminds me of the work of this Minty Moment. Minty is a great photographer and videographer. He likes to be part of his image with his great black hat. And I think he's the real master of integrating people into architectural shots to emphasize the structure and give it a little bit more life and depth. Although I really like the image by itself, it's a very nice interpretation of the building. What puts me off a little bit is the posture of the person up here. He just looks a little bit crouched and doesn't mirror the energy of the building. So probably I would have got rid of him. I really like the framing of these two people here. It's the first time that we can see some context where the building stands in. It looks like a beach and an ocean next to it. And this gives me just more context, more information, and makes me more interested in the scene. Other than that, we have very nice implementation of framing here. The people are framed in many different subframes. And this really focuses the image again on the center where the people are, similar to the second image. Image series number 7. I really like this image. It almost looks AI generated. It's really hard to look at photography in 2026 and not think, is this a real photograph or is it AI? Because it just looks too perfect. It's so moody. It's so cinematic. It immediately reminds me on Todd Hido's work. So this is an image that Todd Hido is most known for. It's part of his series House Hunting, where he photographed old buildings in rural America in the night. And the white fence is just so stereotypic for America. And I really like how this photographer got some reference to this iconic structure. So I think I just like everything about this image. Of course, we just talked about the fence. That looks amazing. The snow is completely without any imprints of footsteps. It looks just perfect. We have a very strong central light which pulls us in. The rest of the image is very moody. Maybe I would have raised the exposure just slightly to give a little bit more context, but in the end it just works as well here. What I also really like is the branch from the upper left corner that's framing the image beautifully. We just get some context and some structure without overwhelming the shot. And even the windows up here are perfectly framed by the tree branch, which is very hard to pull off. Then in the background, we have the car here, just giving us a little bit more context. There's another car here. And then even the upper right corner is not empty. We have these trees up here, which just give a little bit more context. A perfect shot for me. So I'm really excited which other images come from this photographer. Okay. I didn't expect that. Coming from this shot here, I had really high expectations, and this image doesn't meet them. It's quite the opposite of what I really liked about the first shot, because here we get a lot of interfering lines and empty space. When I photograph houses, I always try to show the door as the entrance of the building. It's like showing the eyes of a portrait for a person. It's just the entrance to the soul of the building. Also, the tree branches are just cutting through the roof line here without any sense. We have a lot of empty space, like all of this part of the image here is really telling me nothing. It looks a little bit muddy, out of focus. I was hoping for more. Okay, but let's see how the third image is pulled off. I mean, it's a pretty classic scene that I've seen many times from different photographers. I remember some series that I saw during the COVID-19 times where a photographer moved from house to house to photograph the inhabitants through their windows. But this image is also not giving me a lot here. It's, yeah, we have the central perspective. We have a very strong central element with the lamp inside. You get some warmth, some glow. It looks very analog, has a cool feeling. But the rest of the image is just empty for me. There is not really any context that I'm interested in. There are no leading lines. There are no other frames in it. And here we have a strange reflection. There was someone coming through during a long exposure here. This line is not working for me. I'm not sure if these are trash cans. Another shadow that's not doing anything. So I think this is a good example of what the difference is between an awesome singular image and an awesome series. This image is amazing by itself, and I might hang it on my wall. but the series as a whole doesn't really work for me. I think here the photographer really needs to put in more working hours, finding more interesting subjects and better compositions. Series number 8. So that's an intense blue. I think I've seen the building before, but not in this kind of composition. And I absolutely love the composition here. So you clearly see that there is a cutout part of the facade that you can look into, but the photographer really pulled this off to make it a very strong graphic, one-dimensional image. With repeating rectangles, we have the lettering in the perfect spot in the lower right corner, contradicted by the cloud on the other side, with a lot of empty space over here, over here, over here, which is surrounding these 3 strong elements that really work well together. Amazing image. Very good. Okay, so the photographer seems... Is it the same building? Oh, I'm not sure about that. Maybe not. Okay, so we have a series of white buildings against a clear blue sky, which by itself is a nice thing. The series has a good continuity in its style and grading. We have all vertical images that work very good together, and I could really see this as a triptych of these 3 images. But I get drawn mostly towards this image. I've seen plenty of cut out towers in the past, and this one is not really giving me a lot of thrill. It's technically very good. We have all the parallel lines. It looks architecturally very pleasing. I'm not sure about the light reflection here. I mean, if you would remove it, maybe the image would become too sterile, too clean. And this is just like a little scar on the facade, which makes it more interesting. And also we have a reflection of the surrounding here, which takes a little bit away from the ultra clean approach of the photo. And for this shot, when I compare to the first 2 images, it feels a little bit cluttered. Suddenly we have a lot of detail in the image. We have all these little lines here, especially over here, which make the image feel less organized. Also, we have much more structure through the clouds. The shadow over here is not interfering in a pleasing way with the window. It's not continuing the line. So I think this photo has some problems to solve and might not be the perfect fit. Let's continue with the second to last series. The photographer used a very wide angle lens to get the mast in here. And I'm not sure about the amount of negative space. If you look at it, we have around 70% of the image almost empty. And then crammed into the lower right corner, there is so much texture and so much information, not just by the surrounding, but also by the shadows and by all the elements of the building. Let's see how the series continues. Again, we have a jump in dimension from vertical to horizontal. I really like this image as well. There's just a magical thing about central compositions. They feel so calm and you can really rest your eye on them and explore the whole scene without getting drawn through the image all the time. When I enter the image with my eye, I follow this pole here and it immediately draws me towards this amazing structure of concrete cubics in the center of the frame. Then we're getting stopped by the cross against the gray sky. Continuing the composition, we have very nice frame lines through these 2 trees. They are pretty symmetric and not just stop the viewer from leaving the frame, but they also lead them towards the image again, which I really like. And they get mimicked by these trees here. So all of the trees are pointing towards our main building. And you can see so much repetition in this image. We have 4 trees on the right, 4 trees on the left. We have these 2 lights. It's just perfect symmetry and an amazing calmness in this frame, which is also emphasized by the gray tones. We have gray here in the foreground, gray in the building and gray in the sky, with just a little hint of green through the trees. Again, another church. In a pretty similar fashion, we also have a central perspective here with very interesting surroundings. This time we get even more context on where the church is sitting. This is another nice example of subframes. So the central point is the entrance door, very nicely framed by this little bridge over here. And then we have another subframe through the roof line. We have multiple leading lines that lead us towards the center of the image and don't distract or pull us out of the frame. Besides the core building itself, there are two important structures that give the image balance. We have the tower on the left side, and then we have this big mountain on the right side. And I think these two elements really work very well together. They just balance each other very nicely. And again, the color grading here is great as well. You don't always need blue skies to make your images pop. I really love the gray and gray and gray. That's a very nice continuation. And if I look at these two images side by side, it would be one of the strongest series I've seen today, but I'm really not sure about this image. Okay, let's get to the last series for today. I really like the color grading here as well. We have these muted tones, it looks a little bit faded, and we have the cooler shadows. That's very nice. So from a color standpoint, I really dig this style. Also the composition is very well balanced again. Coming from the lower right corner, we have this continuation of the line that draws us through the image, and then we get pulled back and the circle begins again. So there's not just one continuation, we have this circle here, but we also have this circle here. They really help you explore the whole frame without leaving the picture. Also the building itself is very interesting. I'm really not sure. There are some elements that I really like about this image, but some that I don't. Coming from the first shot, it looks like we might still be in the same location. The grading is continued very nicely as well. It feels like the same scene. And I also like the composition, how he framed this one arch with the other arch, giving us multiple subframes. We have the central frame here, then we have the next frame over here, and then a third frame over here. So it's like three droplets inside of each other. And I understand why he put a person in this spot, because it gives the person a very nice framing. The pose of the person looks a little bit fake, and for me the person takes way more than it adds to the frame. Also we have these structures over here, probably lights that I would have removed to make the frame cleaner. And I think having this frame without the person and maybe with a continuation of these rails here, it would have just made the image cleaner. So yes, we are really in the same spot for all three images. And I must say, looking at all three images, I don't really have a problem here with the change of aspect ratio. I understand why the photographer needed to do that for this frame, and this image here combines the other two images. We have parts from the past two images combined in this one frame, and it's also an amazing composition as well. Again, we enter from the lower right corner and then get drawn towards the roof line until we hit the two big poles here. And then we have two subframes again in the image, maybe even three subframes that really draw the attention to the center of the image, but are dynamic again. I like that the sky is not completely empty. We have some clouds, some natural interference that gives the image more liveliness, because by itself it's pretty empty. I might have removed these little posts here, looks like some posters from a museum, and maybe I would have cleaned up the sides of the structure over here. But all in all, very nice image. My absolute favorite is the infrared series about Zollverein in Essen. Technically, it is beautifully executed, but even more importantly, it feels different. It immediately grabs my attention. I've actually been thinking about converting one of my own cameras to full spectrum for quite a while. Zach Henderson wrote a very interesting review about this in a recent issue of MEDIUMFORMAT magazine. You can use the discount code linked below if you want to check that out. My second favorite series is the set of night images with the houses surrounded by overwhelming landscapes. The topic might not be clearly defined at first glance, but I really like the interplay between the buildings and their surroundings. In all three images, I can feel a quiet sense of threat or disappearance. And that tension is beautifully contradicted by the calm central perspective. But maybe I'm biased here because documenting architecture in remote and isolated places is very close to my own work. Choosing number 3 is harder. In almost every other series, there are 1 or 2 images that feel a little weaker than the rest. But if I ask myself which series I would most like to see continued as part of the Hasselblad Masters prize, my answers would be the brutalist churches. The winner receives a Hasselblad camera, 2 lenses and a production budget of $5,000 to create a new series around a specific topic. And I would really like to see how this photographer develops that idea further. I like the color grading, the atmosphere, and the way the buildings are placed within their environment. So, what do I take away from this analysis? Photo competitions are not only about perfectly polished commercial work. They are about novelty, emotion, and a clear personal vision. They celebrate photographers who are bold enough to follow their own visual instinct. And even if it sounds a little quirky, this encourages me to continue photographing fuel stations at night, wind turbines and transmission towers. Because that is my way of showing the world through my own eyes. And I'd invite you to do the same. Take a look at the other Hasselblad Masters categories and see which work resonates with you. For example, my fellow photographer and Alpa ambassador Joni Hedinger was shortlisted in the highly competitive landscape category with his Glacier series. Congratulations, Joni. Take your time to analyze what you like about these images. Save some of them to your inspiration board, and maybe they will become the starting point for your next series. Also, let me know in the comments which series are your favorites in each category. Thank you again to Hasselblad for sponsoring this video. And if you would like a personal photo critique with me, check out my one-on-one mentoring sessions linked in the description. You'll also find my quick setup guide for the X2D and X2D Mark II, as well as my Hasselblad masterclasses this summer in Oberhausen, Hamburg and Leipzig. Until then, have fun shooting!